When you talk about abstract expressionism, you're really talking not about a consistent tendency, but about a variety of people who broke into their own voice or their own manner at roughly the same time under circumstances which influenced how that happened, but in each case it happened differently.
I think everybody from 1945 on is looking for some sort of sense of salvation in the aftermath of World War II. And I think the modernists who came of age during this time period, everybody from Jack Kerouac to Allen Ginsberg to the abstract expressionists themselves, are trying to find a way of salvaging themselves in what was, for them, a very catastrophic landscape. There is this sense that the individual self needs to find some way of communicating to the world and to others in a new way.
The exact composition of the abstract expressionist movement is still a matter of debate, but over the decades since 1950 there has emerged a general consensus about a handful of key names. We think of Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, Mark Rothko, Robert Motherwell, Arshil Gorky, and last, but certainly not least, Clifford Still.
The memoirs of Still and Pollock and others describe very passionately the importance of painting. And one by one, they all developed this highly autobiographical signature style. And I think those American artists, for all their differences, have many important properties that do bind them together. Almost all of the abstract expressionists by 1950 started to work in a scale that was somewhat unprecedented for a studio practice. Through scale, you could actually be in the painting. In fact, that's a common phrase that they would use, is what it's like to be in the painting. It becomes an environment that you become of. The other quality that I think binds this group of artists is what's often referred to as all-over compositions. The idea that in traditional art, there's usually a central image or subject, whether it's a portrait or a still life element, that is the center of our attention and probably the subject of that painting. In abstract expressionist compositions, the entire composition is the image. It's one thing. And so the left corner is equally as important as what's going on in the center. Or in the case of Clifford Still's work, there's little touches of color that make appearances almost in surprising ways to draw attention to the entire surface of the picture. So our eyes are continuously moving over these abstract expressionist paintings, trying to find an image to rest on, but in fact that's part of the game. We're constantly moving over these images just as the artists were as they were painting them.
The designation abstract expressionism encompasses a wide variety of post-war American painting, through which the U.S. first became the center of the avant-garde. A major proponent of the New York School preferred the term painterly abstraction in order to describe the formal qualities of this painting, its lack of figuration, and loose brushwork. The related term action painting was coined to refer to the gestural act of painting, which is considered the artist's unconscious outpouring or enactment of some personal drama. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Jackson Pollock, considered the foremost abstract expressionist, places canvases on the floor to pour, strip, and splatter paint onto them, and to work on them from all sides, which set him apart from the tradition of vertical easel painting. The next video will discuss the life and technique of Jackson Pollock.
"60 years later, the audacity of a painting like this by Jackson Pollock still has the power, I think, to astound us. You have the sense of an artist breaking out into territory that had not been tried before. What Pollock was doing was so extreme in terms of the painting tradition that I think even he himself felt somewhat bewildered by it. And one of my favorite Pollock stories is this. When he was at his studio in the Springs in Long Island and asked his wife, Lee Krasner, to come look at what he had done, he asked her, "Is this a painting?" Not is this a good painting or is this a great painting? He wasn't even sure what he had made, whatever it was a painting. The feeling of being at a dawn of a new age, the dawn of an age that followed one in which basically civilization had almost destroyed itself, was uppermost, either consciously or unconsciously, for all of these artists. The boldness of what these artists were trying to do by transplanting the center of the avant-garde from Paris to New York needed to be evident in how they made their paintings. Each of them invented essentially a new tactic for how to make a painting, and nobody more so than Jackson Pollock, who departed from the idea of using a brush and making brush strokes to paint a scene, and instead, with the wooden tip of the brush, either fling or drip or spread or ooze the painting across the canvas in these ecstatic, dramatic, slow, fast, wavy, straight, there's no end of adjectives you could use, lines that fill it from corner to corner, from top to bottom and left to right. Another famous anecdote about Jackson Pollock concerns the time that the artist Hans Hofmann asked him if he liked to paint nature. And supposedly Pollock's reply to him was, "I am nature." And whereas that story may or may not be true, and certainly plays on Pollock's reputation as having been very gruff and not a man of many words at all, it does convey something essentially true about abstract expressionism, that what the topic that most interested these artists was themselves, and in more general terms, the human being. So the interest was the energy of a person, the psyche of a person, the values or the principles of a person, the physical presence of a person. When you look at a painting by Jackson Pollock, there's no way that you can think of it just being made by fingers and hands. Indeed, it's hard for you not to imagine your own body moving, leaping, dancing, straddling, juggling around the canvas on the floor. This energy is what sets Pollock apart from almost any other artist. It's almost hard to believe that the painting is not moving while you're looking at it. And of course, the reason is that it's your eye. Your eye is moving. And maybe your body is even moving too as you go from side to side of a room to take in the full expanse of the picture. And as you try to dig into the picture and figure out where one line starts and stops, or which layer is on top of another, or where the blurry areas of paint get interrupted or interrupt the lines. You also realize that there are all sorts of different kinds of paint, some shiny, some matte, some even metallic. And in a painting such as Full Fathom 5, you realize it's not just paint, but it's things that are embedded in it, whether it's keys or coins or bits of trash. This is the world brought into the swirl of that surface. And the paint has the power to engulf the other materials in the atmosphere that it's creating. For all of these works, Pollock did not start out with a sketch. He did not start out with some kind of pre-calculated plan of where the painting would go. And in that way, we think about Pollock paintings very much as precedents to a lot of art which has since then called performance art. Because as he was making a painting, the artist was, in a sense, a performer. He was not somebody fulfilling a preconceived plan. He was somebody engaged in a spontaneous set of actions whose results would be as much a surprise to him as to anybody else.